All right, we are recording.
We do see something. Okay.
Yeah, so that little red, I think it turns red next to record.
Okay.
I don't know how to make this box go away. Perfect. So we're still in norms then. Other thoughts. So we have the take space, make space, and then we have several other thoughts from Julie that I think are really speak to kind of that comfort level of people sharing their thoughts. What other ideas do people have? Do you have any you want to share with us, Sue?
Yes, I do a little minimizing on my computer so I can look at some things that I have. So I think one of the ones that I would propose would be to practice mindful listening, meaning that we try to avoid planning what we're going to say next as we're listening to others, just giving that whoever's speaking our whole attention.
I was listening and writing down. I was giving my whole attention. Yeah, I think that's that sounds good to me. Everybody agree that makes sense? It's one of our norms. And we don't need to get this perfect tonight. I think if we start this process and this thought process, I think that will. So maybe we'll get a couple more, and then we'll move on.
I guess for me, like, I even appreciate that there's been some email conversation back and forth. Even that Kristen today shared some policies over the email. I'm very comfortable with that as well. I mean, if somebody maybe does not want to bring up a concept right now, but they want to share a policy via email, sometimes that's kind of a more comfortable avenue as well.
Perfect. I think that is something that we can incorporate. And actually, there's a number of different things I think that people maybe have sent to Anne that at some point we kind of need to figure out how the best way to share that out. I don't think it necessarily needs to be in the norms of our meetings, but I think it could be something that's clear to everybody, so that we know how that will be done. Maybe we can talk about that specifically after. Now, as far as our other meeting norms, any other, Ms. Vieira, any thoughts?
Well, there's some basic ones, start on time, stop on time. Don't talk over others, which is kind of easy to do in these kind of meetings because we just mute you. But it's that being respectful. I love the mindful listening. I think that goes along with being present. I know we're all busy doing millions of other things, but to put the phone away, we're here, for this time to talk about these things that are not easy to talk about, but to be present and have that conversation and have it have all of your attentions. Those are kind of the ones that I was thinking of.
No, I think those are great. And I think that, it's not that contentious talking about norms. So it's a good time to, some of these, in a different setting, I would feel like, oh, well, these are obvious. But I think this is perfect, because I think that, as we start to talk about things potentially are uncomfortable, I think that it's going to be all that much more important. So no, I think those are great. And I agree that the being present kind of fits right in with the mindful listening, right? So that, I I think those fit together well, and both are very relevant. So we have about 5. If there's this can be a work in progress. Does anybody have any that they really want us to talk about and have on tonight?
I'm not sure if this is a norm, but I guess just thinking about how will we establish, I know we talked about having an agenda, but is there a prompt, or once we get going? I mean, I think I agree with Sue that we'll be to be having mindful listeners and not planning ahead in terms of necessarily what we're saying to be in that moment for those discussions, but also if we're somewhat prepared maybe about the topic or what we're working on, it does give us a little time to maybe reflect and be a little more prepared for those discussions. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know if that's the norm or, but I think it's something, maybe a practice that once we get going, we might have.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think it was our intention for that to happen, and I think we just got I think that it was a little unclear how that was going to happen. So, but I agree completely. I think that that makes sense. Definitely for me, just presiding is a lot easier to have an agenda than to not. So, so yeah, absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense. So, any others before we move on?
Bob, I know that it's come up about records and reports, and I do have notes. I do prepare a report for the board. I typically send that to the district clerk. We're in a position where we do not have somebody in that position. So and also I didn't know if people wanted me to just email these things randomly. So if people are comfortable with me preparing the reports, I can include that information in an email. People have shared ideas. I have several websites and different articles that people have shared with me. I don't know. I just would like to know what people's comfort level is with receiving that through the time between the meetings. I'd be happy to do that, but I didn't want to just assume it. Everybody wanted to have it happen that way. So, and we at the board, we still have to come to an agreement about how we are going to, is it records or is it minutes, and where all of that's housed and how it's handled. So we're still in the process of getting that ironed out.
Perfect. So my preference would be to have a place where stuff goes, not necessarily in emails, but emails are fine as well. But I always have a preference for Dropbox, but I know that school tends not to use Dropbox. So Google Docs or something, a place where stuff can be put and retrieved. It's kind of nice to get it both ways. You get the email, it reminds you, but then to be able to go back and look and just have it in a spot. Dropbox works great. It's just a folder that's on your desktop, and you can put stuff there, and if it gets updated anywhere, it updates on your desktop. But actually,
oh, I'm sorry, is that an app or something? Desktop?
It's like I think it's like an app, and it's free for small amounts of stuff. With Word documents don't take up much space, so.
So I put in the comments that we can in Google make a shared drive. It's similar to Dropbox, only it's just part of our Google kind of world, that we can make a shared drive or a folder for all the documents for subcommittee. I think similar, don't you have one? Isn't there one for the communications committee? Is that how you're doing?
Yeah, there is. I'm so used to Dropbox, but yeah, no, I can force myself to. Yeah, that if that's what works for more people, that's fine. Can you work offline with that, or do you have to be online to use that?
I think you need to have access online to it.
Right, that's what I thought.
You can make files available offline.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So then I think okay, yeah, no, so I think that makes sense to have that depository where stuff can live. And I think it makes sense to email it so people know it's there, because people aren't just going to regularly check that. So I think it makes sense to email it, but
Sure.
stuff that's relevant to everybody that we email, we might as well just also stick into that spot so that then we can go back and find it.
Okay, that makes sense, and I have to do a little self-instruction on how to do that, but I'd be happy to try and figure it out so that there would be a place where we can, because I already have a pile of things that I've started collecting, so.
So you know who's really Dan Snyder? He actually helped us a bunch on the communications committee. So he could he'll do a tutorial for you, I bet.
Okay, good.
All right. So there were a few chats here, and so basically people talking about being comfortable with the emailing. I think that's fine. You just sent that now, Dave, the email on norms for Courageous Conversations.
Yeah, I sent it back with the as a reply all to the email that Ann sent out with the web link from the NISBA. I also included the webpage of Courageous Conversations, which is about race conversations in schools and workplaces and others. It's something that I went to as one of my NISCUS conferences a couple years ago. Great speaker, great conversations, but they're similar in nature, so those norms might prove to be helpful.
Perfect. Excellent. And that probably makes sense then to have that end up in the same spot. So moving on, our next item was equity. So there was some push at the last meeting. I think we left agreeing that that we would discuss, what equity meant and kind of, for lack of better words, define what it means for this group. As I thought about that afterwards, I started to think more that, I think that it is. I don't think we need to necessarily redefine the word, but I think what that means for this committee and what this committee is going to do with it. And so I had thoughts of potentially trying to take parts of or watch closely enough again the webinar from NISBA on equity, but I did not get to do that. And so at some point we may want to watch part of that on here as part of this committee. But I think so. I don't necessarily want to leave it to me to define equity here, but I think that it's basically giving, it's providing for people what they need, right? So, and it's often compared to equality, and it's not the same as equality, right? So equality would be everybody gets the same, and equity is that people get what they need. I think there were a couple of people who were not with us tonight who were driving some of those questions, I think. So I don't necessarily have a prepared material for right here, but I think that what are people's thoughts on, I guess, what do people feel like they have a 30,000 foot understanding of equity? I'm looking for yeses. I'm looking for nods and shakes. All right. I can't see. And Kristen, Keenan, and Julie, I can't see your. If you could, if and don't. I might have spoken before, like it's really obvious, and I don't think it is obvious. It's something that, honestly, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I probably my first sense of really thinking about equity was probably from some Facebook meme, right? So, so fairly superficial, but I'm curious for our non-camera participating members if they could give us just an indication of the comfort level with equity as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, as far as me thinking equity, yeah, there is a difference between equity and equality, but I think equity is equal, it's a right for everyone. It's a right that's shared by everyone. You want a right to religion, everyone has a right to religion. You want a right to vote, everyone has a right to vote. You want a right to have a voice, everyone has a right to voice. I think if you think of Constitution, that's kind of an equity policy. Everyone falls under those rights, those given rights. When I think of it that way, equality, I mean, no one has to have the same religion I have, but everyone has to have a right to a religion. I think of, you're not all going to vote the same as me, but everyone has a right to vote. So I think as you go to the equity policy, it's more securing a right. No one has to drive the same car as me, but everyone who has a driver's license has a right to drive. And so I think in this policy, when I see this, I think of everyone having a right to that voice, everyone having their rights secured. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Kristen wrote in that she is fairly comfortable. And Keenan?
So I actually listening, I feel like I know less than I thought I did, but listening to other people talk about it, I think I'm starting to understand more, especially the difference between equity and equality.
Perfect. Good. Well, thank you. Did anybody what? And you sent out the link, right? You sent the link for the NISPA webinar.
I did, but I just realized I didn't send it to everybody. So I apologize for that. It was my oversight. I will get that out to everybody. What I need to do is get a little bit more organized, create a list and make sure that I am using that completely. So what I had done is I had just picked up the list of names that I had originally sent out the blast about the meeting, and I didn't stop to consider, who else I needed to get it out to. So I apologize, but I will send that back out again.
Perfect. Was anybody able to, anybody besides Ann and I able to watch that or listen to that who received? It is long. It's hour and a half,
Yeah,
right?
so.
Ish. And so it is. Was anybody able to watch that?
I was able to watch it.
Okay. Did you said you did, Dave?
Yes, I did.
Do you either of you think that there would be value in us watching parts of that, all of that or parts of that in an equity committee meeting?
Yeah, I think so. It's Lavelle and Oliver are fantastic. I don't know Mike as well, but I listen to them talk all the time. They're just wonderful speakers and have very well versed in this topic. It's certainly worth the whole thing, but we might want to hit parts that we think are most important to the group. So, we can catch it in snippets at a time. I'm thinking like right toward the front, like the first question out of the gate is this question, what is about defining equity? And then all the participants give a definition of that. And I think that would be very helpful for this group. Just to help to take a very abstract concept and try to internalize it more to get a broader understanding of what it means to others, and then be able to take that, how others view it, and how that might mean to us as well, would be very valuable.
So Lavelle is Lavelle Brown and Oliver's Oliver Robinson.
Yes.
They're the superintendents of Lavelle Brown is the superintendent of Ithaca City High School, and Oliver Robinson is the superintendent of Shenandoah. And for NISCUS, is there a committee that they're the head of for NISCUS?
Yeah, there is a committee on equity and inclusivity that they are the head of. for the organization. And they speak with NISBA. They speak, I think most recently, Dr. Brown was at the national level with the American Association of Superintendents, doing presentations there. But they talk to schools and they talk to both these regions as well, and they're a wonderful resource.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very impressive. It was very good. And I think that makes some sense, to at least that beginning part that's answering or discussing this exact question. Okay.
Hey, Bob, do you mind if I share my screen for a second? There's a cartoon that generally gets shared in a conversation about equity and equality that might help some folks.
Perfect. Do you need me? I think we're co-hosts, right? So you should be able to share it without me giving you back control.
I haven't crashed it before. That was fun. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Sorry about that. I just literally crashed, which was new. And a lot of times, for folks who are familiar with the topic, this will look familiar to you. This is kind of the baseline image that gets shared when talking about equity and equality. And to the end, the image to the left that you're looking at is the one that's the equality one. That's making sure that everyone has it's the same thing. But as you can see in the image, just because everyone gets the same thing, it doesn't help everybody the way it's intended. The gentleman here could see without the box, so he didn't need the box to get help. The young man could use the box, so it helped him. But the youngest of the three, the box doesn't help at all. So in inequality, when looking more at giving folks what they need to be successful, we can see here they've taken that box away from the gentleman who can already see over the fence and moved it to the youngest of the group to be able to see over the fence. That way, everyone's gotten what they need, and everyone can meet that same kind of outcome or that same objective of being able to see over the fence. You can Google this, equity versus equality. It'll come up in a Google search fairly easy. It is kind of the baseline image. It has since kind of taken a life of its own to go beyond that very basic image to talk about what does the fence represent, or there are other stages that go beyond it. But some conversation there's articles around that too that you might find useful as you continue to kind of wrap your head around equity and equality and those differences.
Perfect. So a couple quick thoughts on, I actually have it pulled up. I could share my screen and we could actually watch the first part of that webinar if we wanted. We could do that right now, or we can wait till next meeting. We also could, is anybody here familiar with using WebEx and breaking into groups? I know it's possible, but either principal? No. Okay. Well, why don't we have that as a learning objective for next time, and then we can, because I think that will be useful, and but we won't waste the time trying to figure that out on the fly. Excuse me. So now, do we? I guess I have a question for the group. I think everybody who's here well, have we strictly defined the committee yet? And the reason I ask is because we don't have, I think everybody who's here is on the committee. Is that correct?
Is everybody here willing to have their name on the list as far as a committee member? Okay.
And
Absolutely.
perfect. So then my question is, if, when we kind of, I'm really looking for direction here, is when we draw a circle around that group, and then if people from the public come, and I'm just wondering, as I preside, at what point do we draw a circle around that? If we do draw a circle around that and say, okay, we have people on the committee and then we have the observing public, just for simplicity for me. So I know, it makes, well, I guess I'm curious what other people's thoughts are and even the need to do that, number one. And if there is a need at some point to do that, when do we do that?
I have a thought with that, and it goes back to the video that was sent before. I guess my thing is we keep these open, but I know I'd be willing to do some research and different things outside of the meeting rather than spend the meeting watching videos and things. And I don't know how other people feel about that or if they're comfortable doing that, but I would think anyone on the actual committee would maybe be able to do that, where people coming in might not be part of the Google Drive or where things are being sent. Or I don't know that we close it necessarily, but if people are willing to like do some reading or watch videos or things outside of the group, I don't know how people feel about that, but I would think you'd need to define more of the group if we were going to do anything like that. Which I don't know if that's been discussed really, how much we'll do outside of the group versus just at the group.
I think we talked about it a little bit at the last meeting, but I don't think we decided per se. And I think that in general, I think that, yeah, some of that time is better spent outside. I do think that potentially watching part of this video would be more powerful as a group, and then also timely as far as then having discussion on it. Does not at all have to happen tonight, but I think that even for myself, having already watched it, I would appreciate watching again, and I actually appreciate watching it with other people that I was going to have this type of discussion with. We don't have to watch the whole hour and a half of it, at least not at one sitting. But I think that in this case, I do think that it makes some sense to dedicate some time to watch it.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily saying just the video. I was trying to talk more in the sense of defining the group. Whereas if you're part of the group, are you doing work outside of these meetings versus people just coming to watch might not be doing that other work. And I don't know if we've actually decided if people are going to be doing things outside of the group. But certainly if there's parts of the video that are helpful to discuss as the group, I'm not saying not to do that. I was just more trying to define the group, where if you're on that committee, maybe you'd be doing work outside, where if you're not on the committee, you'd be just kind of listening.
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because for me, presiding, if there is somebody who's from the public who feels like they want to jump in, I just need a little bit of clarity for me of what constitutes the group. Particularly, I think as we move into discussions that could be uncomfortable, or people could disagree about, and just trying to anticipate. I mean, that's the whole point of the norms, and also me trying to understand as kind of moderating that, presiding at the meeting. So, all right. So I feel like we're kind of setting some stuff up here. We haven't really gotten into what our goals are, but I think that's clarifying some of this is important. So it's 1:15 now. So what would we like to do? We've kind of gone through the things that I had on my list. What would we like to do for the last 15 minutes? I say 15 minutes because I was kind of assuming an hour. The last 15 minutes that we have here together today.
I kind of have some insight into that cartoon that Dave shared. Obviously, the equity would be the right. I feel kind of looks like the fence, like that is a right, right? And so everyone has the right to an education, and then how to give that right to everyone is that equity piece where everybody else has the box that they need to meet that right, right? So if it's poverty and my poverty is keeping me back from an education, and equity would be I'm getting scholarships, I'm getting opportunities because I need that support to have that right. Is that kind of like the look that we're taking here, of an equity being like I have a right to something, and if I need extra supports that others don't, then that's kind of that equity piece. I'm just looking for insights from people versus equality versus equity there. For an example, poverty or education as a right, like voting as a right. You know, how I might need somebody to drive me to the voting booth versus someone else just being able to drive themselves. So the equity would be I need extra support to get to a voting poll. Does that make sense? I just want some insight as we define equity. What are we really looking at?
Would anybody like to chime in there? Go ahead, Ann.
Well, no, one of the things that kind of came home to me when I was listening to that webinar is that both gentlemen spoke about not necessarily looking at what you were offering, that you were offering equally to everybody, but to take a look at what you were getting as outcomes. And if you weren't getting the same outcomes, then you really needed to do a dissection as to what was getting in the way, what were the roadblocks, because we as a school, we want to make sure that every student learns and learns to the best of their ability, and that they learn what they need to do as they move forward, whether it's more school and to the workplace or wherever it is that they wanted to go. But if the outcomes are uneven, we need to start to take a look at what some of those roadblocks were. So it was a different way for me to think of, when I was teaching, it was not necessarily what was equal, but what was fair. People got what they needed at the time that they needed it. But it gave me a different perspective. So Julie, for me, this is a work in progress. I still am working on how I'm defining it, because as the more information that I take in and try to take a look at this, it changes my perspective on the things that I'm looking at and how I want to look at it. So for me, it's kind of ongoing. I'm not set yet with everything.
I think a really good example that is very present day and what's going on now when we talk about equity is the technology here in Salem. We are remote this week. There are families that have no technology. How is that equitable? So what are we doing to make sure that it's equitable? Are we going paper-based? Are we having phone conversations? Are we doing emails? What are we doing to level that so that all of our students are getting what they need? They're all being given the stuff, but are they learning it at their level, with the tools that are needed? Because some students need a little more support. They may not have the technology to get that. So what are we doing to make sure it is equitable? So that to me is a prime, in the moment, what's going on, equitable example of what we're facing right now in our district. So I hope that makes it a little clearer as well.
No, thank you, Karen. I was listening, and then I wanted to write some of that down. So,
I wanted to add one thing that I know as I've learned more about equity. Yes, in the school setting, a lot of it is making sure everyone has access to the same education and But I think part of it is also the social emotional aspect of it, of feeling safe. Does everyone feel safe in the school? Is everyone being treated respectfully? So it's not just that they're being able to learn, but are they in a safe environment? That's a lot of what I've seen regarding equity policies as well, is just the safety piece, or the safety piece added as well as the access to education. So I just want to throw that in there as well.
No, thank you. That's a good point. I think that in our last climate survey, there were questions about feeling safe for students. Is that your recollection as well? Right, that was a few years ago. And my recollection is that there were some trends. There were some trends that would point to a need for a equity committee. It's a little bit. My recollection is a little bit vague, but is that something that that you could have for us, Dave, for our next meeting?
What are you looking for? What specific are you looking for, Bob?
Do you recollect that our last climate survey, which would be our most recent one, that there were questions for students, correct? And some of those questions were about feeling safe.
We have a couple different surveys. We have that full kind of climate survey from 2 or 3 years ago that has some of those questions. But I want to say our last the substance abuse we do with the county has some of those types of questions on it too, but that's only high school. So if you're looking full, kind of the full district, yeah, I can pull up. I can have that out and available. It's a couple years old, but those kids are still they're just older.
Right. What also might then, that might prompt us to want to re-ask the question and see how we've trended since then. And but I think if there's some data available, even if it's a few years old, I think it would make sense to look at that and have that, so we could look at it maybe before the next meeting.
Sure. If I can find it, I'll put it out to everybody.
Perfect. And if you can't, let me know. I feel like it's I probably have it in an email somewhere.
Okay.
But I hadn't actually thought of it recently, but I think that that exists. And I think my recollection is that there was some stuff that pointed to sort of social emotional well-being of students. And some areas of slight concern, I think, but I have to look back at it.
Dr. Glover's correct. The Council Prevention Survey does have quite a lot in it as far as the questions that talk about, do you feel safe in school? Do you feel safe at home in your community? So it does give some feedback about that. But one of the things that's out there are additional pilot programs for climate surveys, and that's actually some of the links that I had been collecting. There's statewide, there's some national ones, and there actually, there's some samples. And Dr. Glover, you and I had talked about this when we talked about our agenda. Have you had an opportunity to look at? It does look like it's been reauthorized, and that we can have access to those climate surveys, because that directly goes to understanding giving us a better understanding of what our starting point is with our school and our school community.
Yeah, I actually have a meeting tomorrow, and that survey is on the topic agenda, and I've already jotted down about getting that to this group. So it's we'll see what tomorrow's conversation is, and I'll share out once I have more information.
Okay, because one of the things I do is I do have the links to the websites, so that would be one thing that I could send out to people so that they can take a look, and we can. There's a lot of information out there, and as Kristen said, there may be a lot of sifting that we need to do, between meetings, but I think the survey would give us a very good handle on. Because we can talk to students, we can talk to staff, we can talk to community members, we can let people know what we're looking at and what we need to, because if we mark it, we measure it, we can change it. So I think that's an important place for us to start.
Perfect. So
I
have about,
if
yep.
I could put it on that. I think that definitely. I really do like that cartoon of the fence because if you think of safety and security at school as being the fence, there are some kids that feel safe and secure at school. They don't need a box, right? They can see over the fence, they feel safe and secure. Then there's ones that maybe need one box to get there. And then there's ones that don't feel very safe at all and they need those additional supports. So I think if we look at what we want our school to be in equity and kind of treat it as that fence, then you know that there are some that really are not feeling comfortable. They're either being discriminated against in one or two different things. And I would see them as ones that need more boxes because they're being discriminated against in maybe poverty and sexual orientation, or they're having multiple ways that they feel discriminated against and not safe at school, where we might have one person that's dealing with one type of discrimination and maybe that's one box to get there. So to me that fence could be anything we want our school to be, and are our students able to reach that level, and who needs support with that, and who do we have to support and provide equity to. Does that make sense?
It does. There's people nodding.
I don't mean to keep jumping in, but I do have a question because I did send those links, and then I know Anne had mentioned other people sent her things. I didn't mean to be out of line if I emailed those to everyone. I shouldn't have done that. But should we be sending things to Anne, or are we okay emailing the group? Or I don't want to do anything I'm not supposed to, so I apologize if I did. So I just want to check on that.
No apologies. It's just, I didn't want to start inundating people's, with different emails. I just wanted to know what people expected, and I'm very happy to do it, put it together, or, everybody can share. It's just as you find something. What I need to do is I have to figure out in my Gmail how to get a group because I was just cutting and pasting. So I do have to figure out how to do that. But I don't have Keenan's email, but.
So I guess my question would be, what would our goal be for the next meeting? Like, what types of things would we be looking for or trying to think about before then?
So good question. I had a couple of things written down from, one was the, climate surveys, any sort of data that we currently have, that might shed some light on how different groups perceive their experience and our climate. So I think that's definitely one piece. And I think it would make sense. My thought is it makes sense to watch the first part of that webinar. So that would be something, and I'm maybe stealing a little bit of your thought process to try to build our agenda for next time, so that that we have that in advance so people know. So at least those two. Are there other? Was there anything that we talked about that people are assuming is going to be on the next one as well?
Well, we can be thinking about an action plan, sort of lay out the roadmap for things that we wanted to consider. One of the things that we did, there's quite a long list of possible outcomes. So if people take a look at that, maybe we could maybe do some prioritizing about what topics we want to talk about and in the order in which we want to talk about them.
I just wanted to add that I put in the chat too, but I'd like to add to that about Anne's comment about the survey. So I know we had the previous survey that was from a few years ago, And then just in light of current events and just a lot of things that have kind of occurred over the past even year or two, I think having a discussion about whether it doesn't have to be a long survey, but getting survey from the stakeholders, would that inform our direction? But also I think it's important to think about having a baseline for our work. So, our intent at some point is to have a policy, and then maybe obviously there will be some action in the district and in the buildings in terms of how we do things, and looking at then and not only having a baseline of the survey, but something that we might use periodically to measure our progress. So I think that's important to know, are we in the right direction, and how do we know it's working, to be able to revisit that and really look at moving forward. Because as much as we try, we're not going to necessarily get everything right and perfect. And then over time, you have that information to inform you, how are we doing? Are we moving in the right direction? We've got this part, we're in a good place, but over here we still have some work to do. So I think that is important. I think it's hard sometimes to kind of, you get a little nervous, I think, whenever you always ask for feedback, because you always want to do a good job, but it's sometimes hard to really be open and look at that. But I think it would be important to have further discussion about, as part of our action plan, maybe is whether or not we would have a new survey, or would we use the previous data, and then where would we want to collect that from? Because I think that timing of that would be important to inform our work. So just a thought.
No, I think that all makes a lot of sense. Is anybody familiar enough with the state ed survey, climate survey, to know whether that would, because from the board's perspective, I think that potentially there'd also be questions on that would go beyond this committee. But I think that would that survey have relevance and enough thoroughness for this committee? And I'm not that familiar with it. I know that state ed has been encouraging schools to move in this direction. But Dave, have you gone through that?
I haven't seen the updated one, which is I'm hoping part of the conversation tomorrow, because the climate survey is part of the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, and part of one of the measurements of the state for your schools. How we're measuring progress in our schools is a climate measure. So let me see what I can get for some more information. My guess is there's overlap between those surveys. And there's probably more, as you suggested, there's more on that survey than necessarily what we're talking about here. But I don't think that's not a bad thing.
Right. Well, my first thought is that it would make more sense to have people do one survey and get a good turnout to do that, rather than having a couple surveys going not far from each other. And so, because people could feel like they'd already done it and not realize there was a second one. So if we felt like it would serve the equity committee, I think it would be beneficial, because I think then it would also serve outside of that as well. All right. So that's something we can learn more about.
Is that typically is that a survey just for students, or does that include community, like parents and teachers as well?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a full stakeholder. So it includes faculty, staff, students, parents, community members. It's everybody, as I understand it.
Perfect. Well, so hopefully then, for the next meeting, then we'll have more information on that as well, so that, and then we can see if we think that meets our needs. So we'll for next meeting, we'll have information on data that currently exists, and then we can also look at that other, at the state ed's climate survey, and see whether we think that will answer the questions that we want asked. Perfect. Well, it is.
Oh, sorry. Do we want to send that out earlier so we can look it over as a committee before we meet?
Yeah, that would be great.
I have those websites, Julie, so I will get that email this together and put it out to everybody.
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, we're an hour in because we started a couple minutes late, which we will work to not do in the future. And so I propose that we end for this evening, and we will be back in a month. Are there any closing thoughts, comments? How do people think we did on our norms? I think I didn't go through them one by one, but I think in general we did okay. But
We have a list of those, like what we have so far.
yeah, that's a great idea. Do you feel, Anne, that I can share with you, Anne, what I have from what I
Okay.
think were about those 5 that we came up with, and
Okay.
and then it's 5 or 6, and then we can look at them next meeting and evaluate if we think we need to add anything to that.
And could you confirm the date of our next meeting?
It will be the first Monday in December, which will be about the
December
9th is a Wednesday, I think. So
First Monday in November, 9. Right? No,
that,
I got the
that-
wrong calendar.
I think the 9th is a Wednesday, right?
December 7th, right?
December 7th. That is late. Yeah, it's as late as it can be. So December 7th. Perfect. Any last thoughts from anybody?
One thing I would love to do, not that we need anything else put on our plates, but some of us are really avid readers, and Julie Myler and I got into a discussion, I guess it was last week, I don't know, it's kind of a blur. And she had recommended a book to me, which I've been on and off reading over the past week, and I'm really enjoying it. And we had some discussion about some really great books that are pertinent to what we're talking about. I'd love to start some kind of document or something that has a list of books that are good reads, that maybe aren't, all consuming novels, but, something that I think lends something to our discussion here as a group. Just a thought, might be 1 or 2 books on there. You might say, hey, that sounds awesome. Like put the title and give a little blurb about what it's about and share it with the group. Because we all have so much time on our plates, but I figured why not? I'd mention it.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you all back here on December 7th.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
Thank you. Good night.
And are you using the Gmail? Are you using the Gmail address? 'Cause I'll send you Keenan's address.
I'm sorry, they were beeping and I didn't hear what you said.
Are you using your Gmail address?
Yes, I am.
Because I
Let me
didn't know if you were putting the chat in the notes, and I didn't want to put Keenan's email in that. So, or like if that could be public. So I'll send you, do your email. I'll send you Keenan's email address.
Okay, thank you.
Email, so then that way you can include her, what you're sending out.
Since